I would like to explain how this timer setting works in the system mode of the Sunsynk and the Deye inverters. This is the settings that you use to tell the inverter when to drain your battery and how much, and when to charge it with Eskom or only with solar. So on the Deye inverter, this is the screen you will see on your inverter screen, and on the Sunsynk the layout will look more like this, but it's the same basic functions. It's just set out a bit differently. So the first thing you'll see is there's a tick that says time of use. Use timer. If you tick this box, then all these settings that you do here will be applicable. If you untick it, the inverter will keep your battery full as long as there's Eskom, and it will only use battery when the grid falls away, Eskom, and when you don't have enough solar, it will start discharging your battery all the way to the point that was preset as the shutdown voltage during your installation. And typically we have this one on, so then you have more control over what happens during the day. Here you can see there's 6 time slots. The day is divided into 6 customizable time slots, and you can say each time slot starts at that time and ends at that time. Here you can see the same on the Sunsynk, and then you can tell it what to do during, let's say, those 2 times. This block, this is the Deye one and the grid one. If you tick this box, the inverter during those hours will use Eskom and grid to charge a battery up to 80%. If it's unticked, like this one, the inverter will never use Eskom to charge your battery. So in this case, let's say it's 40%. During the day, your battery maybe goes up all the way to, it's a nice sunny day, the battery charges with solar all the way up to 100%. Now as the sun sets in the evening and your solar doesn't perform as well as it does during the day, it will slowly start draining your battery, and it will stop draining at 40%. If you get a load shedding in that point, at that stage you're already at 40%, now a load shedding or a power outage hits, the inverter will then go below this number, below the 40%, up to the shutdown percentage that was set for your battery. Now that's important to remember. As I said, let's say you're at 40 already, your box is unticked, and now it's load shedding. Now your battery drains to 20% or even 10%. It will stay at that 10% until the next day when the sun is shining again. If in this top scenario your box is ticked, Eskom, remember I said it will drain up to 80% and it will idle there. Now load shedding comes. It will go below 80%. But the difference between a ticked box and an unticked box, a ticked box says you're allowed to use grid to charge my battery. So after load shedding, maybe your battery is at 50%, it says, oh yeah, I'm allowed to charge with the grid. Eskom will take your battery up to 80%. So that if you have a second load shedding, you're not going to have less than 80% battery, where in this scenario, if you used up to 10% of your drain your battery to 10%, it could easily, you will have no power when a second load shedding hits. Generator is the same as the grid, but it uses a generator. Most people that is grid connected and domestic doesn't use the generator. This is the start time of the time slot, and this is the end time of the time slot. And this is the percentage that you would like your battery to either, if it's ticked, Eskom will charge it up to that number. If it's unticked, it will drain to that number, but it will never charge with Eskom. Also, just remember, if it's ticked, the solar will make it up to 100%, and it will also drain back to this 80% when you need more power before it starts charging you from Eskom again. using your Eskom account. As you can see from the previous slide, given the 6 time slots and charge with grid or not with grid, there's many strategies that you can work out for yourself, which is quite a personal decision. But I like to keep it rather simple, and this simple strategy will allow you to not constantly change your settings, but it will still assure a balance between using your batteries for saving and having enough stored energy during load shedding. The actual numbers obviously may change for each person. So the typical settings for this strategy, you tick all your grid boxes. So you can charge in all 6 time slots with grid, and then you put the same state of charge in all 6 boxes. So then you actually only have to decide how much battery power do I want to have in reserve for a power outage. And we can discuss in the next slide. I'll show you a graph that explains it a bit better. Just to explain quickly again what I just explained. So if you have a scenario with, and it is now load shedding, it's officially load shedding, let's say stage 2, then you can decide depending on how much you need for 2 hours and how much battery capacity you actually have installed. You can decide to keep your state of charge at 95%, which means you always have 95% available during load shedding, so you can tap into this blue section. The only way the battery will go from 95 to 100%, this last orange bit, is with solar power, and it can also use that at any point in time when it needs more power compared to what the solar panels can give at that point. So every evening you'll probably see that your battery will drain from 100 to 95 and then idle at 95%. If you get load shedding, it will drain into this blue section. But because we in this strategy ticked all the boxes to charge with grid, let's say after 2 hours of load shedding you're at 40%, it will use Eskom to bring you back to 95%. So that's for convenience setting. No load shedding, and if you stay in an area with a very good grid that never goes out due to maintenance issues or old infrastructure, then this is actually for maximum saving now, where you set your state of charge in your timer settings to 15%. Only way it can go higher than 15 with the solar power, so all the orange is basically free solar power. Any time in the day, even lunchtime, it can tap into this if the house needs more power compared to what the solar panels can give. And every evening it can drain the battery all the way to 15% before you start paying for electricity in your home. And then there's actually a third scenario which is between these two. It's basically a scenario where you say, okay, we don't have load shedding, official load shedding, but the grid in my area is terrible. Every 2 weeks I have an outage. Then you might be somewhere in the middle. Say, I'm not going to keep my battery full for every 2 weeks in case of a grid outage. I'd rather keep it at maybe 50%. So I use 50% of my battery bank to save money, but I always have 50% spare for when this outage comes. So I hope that explains a bit better and makes it a bit more clear of how the system and the timers work.